Hello everyone. Today I'll be discussing opposite colored bishop endings. And white will have more material and black will have to defend that. Here white's got two pawns, but they're doubled. So it's definitely less complicated than if the pawns were connected. So I'll be discussing that in the future. Now, having double pawns is almost like having only one pawn, except that this time if the bishop sacrifices itself for one of the pawns, then the other pawn just promotes, and that's why it's not an available defensive resource. So it's important to understand this ending, because if we learn how to control key squares and double pawn endings where the bishops are opposite colored, then it'll be a lot easier to understand where they're connected, and it's a lot more complicated. So we have to find out what black's threatening. Okay, black is threatening what? So take a minute to think about it. Okay, if black gets to c8, then the white side won't be able to promote their pawns, because the only thing that could drive it away, it's not the king, because kings cannot push other kings away by force, but bishops can, because once a bishop checks a king, it has to move. But kings can't check kings. So if we put a black king on c8, then there's nothing that white can do. So black's threatening one king d8. There's two ways to stop this. Black can go to d8. So white can stop that by going to c7, or it can move the bishop to g5. Now, we're going to see what happens if we try to go to c7 right here. So if the king goes to c7, now we have to find out what white's threat is. So take another minute to think about what white can possibly do in the next move. Okay, so white wants to promote the pawn. So what would be white's next move? White has to get out of the way with the king. So white's next move is going to be that they're going to move their king to b8. We have to stop that by attacking this pawn on c6. Once we move this pawn on c6 right here to c7, then they're going to have their plan complete. So we're going to have to stop that by bishop to f3. If we try to catch the pawn on c5, it's a mistake. It's actually a blunder, because then white plays king b8, and then it's a simple promotion. So after bishop f3, white can only get out of the way by king b6 or king b7. If king d6, well, then the black king just goes to d8 and then c8, and it's over. It's a draw. So if we move the king to b7, which keeps this path available for the pawn and it's protected, it's really an illusion, because first of all, the black king cannot get to d8, because then bishop g5 check, and the black king can't touch d7, and if it does, then white's still going to promote. But this is pointless, king b7, because now all we got to do is just pin this pawn. This pawn's pinned. The pawn on c6 is pinned, and it can't move ever. So after bishop g2, the pin is there. And if king c7, then bishop f3, and the positions repeated. So king c7, bishop to f3. The position repeats. So let's go back. After something like bishop g5, that still doesn't do anything. The plan is that white wants to prevent king to d8 and king to c8, allowing white to play king b6 on the next move. But that's still irrelevant, because after king b6 and c6, so imagine that the king moved to b6 and the pawn was pushed to c7. Then I could still play king d7, and because the black bishop's controlling the diagonal, the long diagonal, well, the white king cannot go to b7. The white king can only go to a7. And in that moment, we'll just play king c8. So let's go back to the original position. After bishop to g5, that prevents king d8. It's the only other move because king c7 is obviously not going to make any progress. Actually, I want to discuss one more thing about king c7 that I missed. So, after king c7, bishop f3. And after king, hold on. Okay, bishop f3, king b6, king d8. And king b7 is the only way to prevent that. But after king e8, the position repeats. And actually, here in this position, when black moved king d8, we can actually even move king e7. This plan was suggested by Stockfish. After bishop g5 check, king e6, and king c7, then bishop e4. And what would black do if white tries to move out of the way, such as king b6? So think about that for a minute. Okay, after king b6, bishop f3. Just like we discussed after king c7, bishop f3, bishop g5. This is the only other move, but then king d7. So back to the original position. After bishop to g5, we're just going to stick to controlling this important diagonal. This is the diagonal that we need because the c8 square needs to be under control. And we have to make sure that we can move a bishop there at some point because it's the only square we can get to that protects the promotion of the pawn from happening. So, c7. If king d5, then we just play bishop g4 and we just keep an eye on this square. No progress is made. If something like king to c4, trying to get to b6, there's really no point because once that the king reaches b6, we can just play our bishop to the long diagonal and make sure that the king never gets to b7. So back to when white played c7. Now we're going to wait around again by controlling the queening square. It's an important move. For example, if we don't control it, and actually we move our king away after king f7, it loses. This is almost just like the main line, but king f7 loses in this moment because after something like king c6, bishop e4 check, king b6, king to e6, king to a7, king to d7, king to b8. This is losing because we're going to promote the white's going to promote the pawn to c8, and it's over. So let's go back to the bishop h3. Now that means that there's only one good move for white. It's either white gets to b7 by moving the king right away, by playing king c6, king b6, or king b7, or we could push the pawn, or white pushes the pawn to c6. But let's see what happens. After king c6, then bishop g2 check. And now we can't, white cannot play king b6 because of the obvious king d7. So back to king d6 and the position just repeats. So bishop h3, it's the same position. So white will play c6, and this is a critical moment because now the pawns are in different positions. So it'll take a few minutes to describe the inequalities, but there is one key inequality in this position that allows black to draw. So take a few minutes, feel free to pause the video and find that key inequality. Okay. The inequality here is the key inequality is that white's second pawn on c6 is now on a light square and cannot be guarded by the bishop. If you have realized this, good job. The plan is obvious now. White will play king b7 to promote the pawn. So white's going to walk the king from d6 to b7. And now, after white promotes the pawn, black will sack the bishop and white will capture that bishop. But as I discussed in the beginning, white still has a pawn that he can promote or she can promote. And so white will just move the king out of the way to b8 or b7 and walk the pawn with the path that the king has secured. It will queen it and the game will be over. However, there is a key detail here. When white takes the pawn on when white takes the bishop on c8, the pawn on c6 is unguarded because it's on a light square and the bishop cannot protect it and the king is away. So white's c6 pawn is unguarded because white's king is temporarily distracted. And so by the use of that tactic where we sacrifice the bishop on c8, if black can take the c6 pawn, when white takes the bishop on c8, the outcome will be a draw because you cannot checkmate with a lone bishop. So who will finish the race? This is when we calculate. Even when it looks like someone can get there first, we must verify the outcome. Trust but verify, unless you're playing blitz. That was a joke. Because black goes first, his or her move will start at 0. From the current position, it takes 3 moves for white's king d6 to get to b7 by the means of king c5, king b6, and king b7. And there, the pawn will promote because if the bishop takes it, the king will take it. But it also takes 3 moves for black's king e8 to get to d5 by 0 king f7, 1 king e6, and 2 king d5. So far so good. It looks like black will draw. But when black plays the king to e6, this bishop on h3 is interfered by its own king, and so pawn can promote straight away. And it's actually a skewer. That's irrelevant though because the pawn just queen, so we cannot let that happen. So bishop c8 must be played after king f7. Then white's king b7 becomes impossible because there's a bishop on c8. So king a7 has to be played. It takes one more tempo to promote the pawn because the king has to get to b8 now and instead of e7. But we also spent the tempo moving the bishop. So because white gained the tempo and black gained the tempo, and the bishop when it moved to c8 cannot be attacked, the tempos cancel out. So the ending sequence looks something like king f7, king c5, bishop c8, exclamation mark, king b6, king e6. And now if the bishop could be attacked here by king c7, we would have to move the bishop away. The pawn promotes, bishop takes, king d5, king b7, and this pawn is protected. That's why it's so important that the bishop cannot be attacked. This allows the tempos to cancel out. And also king b7 is impossible. So after king a7, king d5, the game is a draw. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and feel free to donate by clicking the description and or going to paypal.me/queenmypawn. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.